Back in 2003, I was working with a church in Starkville, Mississippi. It's where Mississippi State University is located, and we had a good group of, a numerous group of college students meeting with us from all over the Southeast who had come to the university there. And one of them, named Elijah, he was from Tennessee, East Tennessee, and he had begun dating a girl back home, and she had been to visit in Starkville and had met with us, and we'd all met her and gotten to know her. And he would sometimes go back home on a weekend, and it was Thanksgiving weekend, and he had gone home to spend that holiday with his family and with her. And Friday morning, early Friday morning, the day after Thanksgiving, I got a phone call. One of the college students had learned, news was just beginning to get out. Elijah and his girlfriend had a car accident Thanksgiving night, and she was killed in that car accident. And nobody back in Starkville knew. I wasn't in Starkville myself. I was away for Thanksgiving, and nobody in Starkville knew about it yet. And I began making phone calls to the brethren there to let them know what had happened. As I did that, after a couple of calls, you don't want to believe something like that happened, right? You have that feeling, no, surely not. And I began that, I'm making these calls, and did that really happen? I'm telling people this. Did it happen? We don't want news like that. Sometimes it doesn't seem real. We don't want to believe those things. Death is difficult. The death of people around us is difficult. It is painful. And I'm sure most all of us have had people close to us die. At some point in our lives, we've had somebody, maybe several people close to us, die. In Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27, we read, "It is appointed for men to die." That's what happens. There's another case. My old college roommate, just a few weeks ago, died. He was my roommate in college. We both lived and worked with churches in the Czech Republic at the same time. I remember my parents lived near New York City many years ago, and he came to visit, and I remember taking him up to the top of the World Trade Center that isn't there anymore. And about a year ago, less than a year ago, we found out he had Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. And he was deteriorating. And I got a call from a friend of mine just a few weeks ago, just over 2 months ago, that Colin was going to be leaving the hospital and going into hospice care. And I thought, well, I'll let him get settled into hospice care, and I'll give him another call. And much more quickly than I anticipated, just 3 or 4 days after that phone call that my friend gave me about Colin, I found out that he had died, and I didn't get to make that phone call. So I delayed on it. We all have those cases. I'll mention 2 more. My mom, I think I've probably mentioned my mom here before. In 2002, she was what we felt was a very youthful 65. She'd always been very healthy, and all of a sudden came down with stage 4 colon cancer. And she fought it for 1.5 years, and she died. 2013, my nephew Adam, at the age of, I think he was 25, he liked to go to he was in school at Western Kentucky in Bowling Green, and he liked to go swim in the river for exercise, and he drowned in that river on a Sunday afternoon. How do we react to death when people around us die? how should we react to death? Another question is, how do you react to a sermon on the topic of death? A few weeks ago, after my friend Colin died, I preached this sermon over in Utica, and one of the ladies there asked me, "What you preaching on tonight?" She was sitting right in front of me. "What you preaching on tonight?" I said, "Death." And she just sat there frozen for a moment. But it's a topic worth thinking about and talking about, because it is something we all face. And I want to say a little more about a couple of these cases. I want to say a little more about my nephew Adam. What he didn't count on when he went swimming in the river that day was that there had been storms just in the days before this, and so the water level was high in the river. There was a place almost under a bridge there, kind of in the middle of town, where there was some carved out space along the shore, and water would kind of circulate in there and then enter the flow of the river again. And normally that was just a very calm motion of water, but the water was high, and it was actually a whirlpool that day. And he didn't take note of that. And he got caught in that whirlpool. And there were a couple of men. They were homeless men living, I don't know if living, but they were staying at least under that bridge. And they saw him struggling and calling for help, but there really wasn't anything they could do. And even if they had run down there, I don't think they would have got there in time. And, we figured out, because Sunday evening he didn't show up at services, which was, everybody knew if he didn't show up, then something's amiss. And then news reports came in about these two men spotting someone going under the surface. And so, we were still hopeful, maybe he got washed downstream. He's maybe injured down there somewhere, but maybe okay. But Sunday turned into Monday and Tuesday, and on Thursday they found his body, and indeed he had drowned. My brother and sister-in-law, his parents, Adam's parents, they always prayed for his safety, right? They always prayed for the safety of all their kids, as I'm sure those of you who are parents do. You pray for their safety. And yet there was a different outcome. How many of you have had that experience? You know someone who's in dire straits, and you pray for them, and you pray for them, and they still die. What do we think of God in those situations? We ask why. I don't think it's wrong to ask why. We may ask that as a sincere question, why? Why was that allowed to happen? Why did you allow that, Lord, to happen? We may ask that even in some anger. Back to Adam's situation in the river, if those two guys who saw him had a rope and a life preserver and just watched and didn't do anything to prevent his death, what would we think of them? So what do we think of God? We know, Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, that he's able to do anything. I like the description in this passage, Ephesians chapter 3:20. Now to him who is able to do exceeding abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us, to him be the glory. God is able to do more than we ask. He's able to do beyond even what we think. He's able to do abundantly beyond all that we ask or think. He's able to do exceeding abundantly beyond all that we ask or think. So what do we think of him when someone close to us dies and we had prayed to God, please don't let that person die? He could preserve every person. He could prevent everybody from dying. But it's not God's job to fix everything that goes wrong in this world. It's not his job. It's not his job to override every disease. It's not his job to interrupt the laws of physics in a river and make sure that every person survives. If it were, if that was his job, we could walk clear across a busy street without looking both ways because, well, God will take care of me. We can text and drive all we want because God will make sure that nothing bad happens. It's not God's job to prevent every bad thing from happening. And in fact, death is here in this world. You go back to Genesis, death is here in this world because we sin. We earn death. Now, I'm very grateful that while that curse is here, that God later sent his Son into the world to die for us so that we can escape the final ultimate consequences of physical death. We can be with him after this life. But that is the curse that is in this world. We die. And if it were God's job to make sure everybody lived, especially maybe all Christians would live and not face, death in ways that, are sad for us, there'd be a lot of old Christians around, wouldn't there? I'd get to ask Paul a lot of the questions. I could just go find whatever city he's in at the moment and ask him some of the questions I have. But that's not the way things go. People do die. We know from Matthew chapter 7 that God gives good things to his children. Matthew chapter 7, verses 8 through 11. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it shall be opened. Or what man is there among you, when his son shall ask him for a loaf, will give him a stone? Any fathers ever done that? You see your kid is hungry. Yeah, here's some rocks. Chew on that. No, you don't do that. We're imperfect men, and we know to do better than that. Verse 10, or if he shall ask for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, imperfect men, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more shall your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? The Lord wants good for us. Now, I do think that this passage, while it highlights God's goodness and it highlights God's care for us and wanting good for us, I do think that the emphasis of this passage, if you look at the context, is that God gives spiritual good things to us. Not that he solves every physical problem that we have, but that he does want what's good for us. In any case, it doesn't say that he's going to grant everything we ever request of him. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, there's an appointed time for everything, and there's a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. And in chapter 12, verse 7, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. We do die. And, we have to accept people around us are going to die. Let's turn to Acts chapter 12. This is the early days of the church in and around Jerusalem. Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. Now about that time, Herod the king had laid hands on some who belonged to the church in order to mistreat them. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread. And when he had seized him, he put him in prison, delivering him to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending after the Passover to bring him out before the people. So Peter was kept in the prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church to God. And on the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains. And guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter's side and roused him, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands. And the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he leads Peter out of the prison. Peter doesn't even think it's real at the moment. But when he's left alone outside the prison on the street, suddenly he realizes, I was free. The angel of the Lord saved me. The church had been praying for Peter, and the Lord delivered Peter. And that's how we like it to go. But did you notice back in verse 2, James and John, those two brothers, who were very close to Jesus. James, the brother of John, Herod put to death with a sword. Peter was delivered. James wasn't. Why? I don't know. I don't know. But the Lord doesn't always deliver even his faithful. And Peter himself was later killed for his faith. It's not like Peter lived till a ripe old age and finally died as an old man when we expect people to die. Peter was killed earlier than that for his faith. So why does God allow loved ones to die, even when we pray they will live? We usually don't know why. And we usually don't have to know why. Well, let me leave out the word usually. We don't have to know why. Think about some characters from Scripture. Abraham, he didn't end up having to slay his son on that altar he built when God told him to sacrifice his son Isaac. But he was mid-swing to take his son's life. And the Lord didn't tell him why this must be done. He just told Abraham to do it. Abraham didn't know why, but he trusted God. And so he followed anyway. We know something, I think at least, we know something about why Abraham was told to do that. Isaac was the beloved son of Abraham. Abraham took him, God told him to take Isaac to the location where Jerusalem would be built up and where God the Father would eventually offer his own son as a sacrifice. Just as Jesus carried the wood of the cross to the location of the sacrifice, Isaac was forced to carry the wood on which he would be sacrificed. It was a period of 3 days that Jesus was in the tomb, and it was a period of 3 days from the time God told Abraham to sacrifice his beloved son until the moment when he began to swing and realized, oh good, I don't have to do this. But in those 3 days, Isaac was as good as dead in Abraham's eyes. All of that, and there's more to it, but all of that event with Abraham and his son Isaac foreshadowed, prophesied the eventual sacrifice of Christ. And that teaches some things to us. That teaches us about a father giving his son and what it means that God the Father gave his son for us. And it's evidence for us because we know those things were written down hundreds of years before Jesus came into the world, and yet there's that story in the Old Testament that so perfectly foreshadows the story of God offering his son, and so many other stories like that in the Old Testament that all foreshadow the coming of Christ and his sacrifice. And all of those things are evidence for us. Why did Abraham have to go through that? Even though his son didn't die on that occasion, why did he have to go through the sorrow of anticipating his son's death? Because there was good to be accomplished in it. Us learning about a father offering his son as a sacrifice. Us seeing evidence planted hundreds of years before the coming of Christ. Evidence that shows us, yeah, this makes sense, that Jesus really did live and die. That this isn't just a bunch of made-up stories. There's evidence that it's real. There was benefit in Abraham having to at least anticipate the death of his son. We think of Job. Turning to Job chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. Job gets the news that all of his servants have been suddenly killed. He gets the news that all of his livestock have been suddenly killed. This is his livelihood. And then in verses 18 and 19 of chapter 1, while he was still speaking, while the servant that brought the news about the livestock was still speaking, another also came and said, "Your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they died. And I alone have left to tell you." Escaped to tell you. Job just lost all his children in a moment. Why? And the rest of the book of Job is about Job asking, why? Why, Lord? His three quasi-friends keep telling him, oh, you've done terrible things. You must have done terrible things. Quit defending yourself. You must have done terrible things in order for God to allow your children to be killed. And Job kept saying, I haven't. I've been good. I've been a righteous man. I've done good to the people around me. Why, Lord? Have you allowed my children to be killed and me to suffer how I'm suffering? Well, we turn later in the book, Job chapter 33, verses 8 through 13. And besides Job's three friends who keep telling him he must have done terrible things, there's a younger man there observing these discussions, Elihu. And we read his remarks beginning in chapter 33, verse 8. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words. Elihu says, Job, I've heard you. I've heard what you've been saying. And then he quotes Job from verses 9 through 11. This is what Job had said. I am pure without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no guilt in me. Behold, he invents pretexts against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in stocks. He watches all my paths. Elihu says, I've heard what you've been saying. This is one of the things you've been saying. And sometimes we may react that way when people die. We pray to the Lord, please save this person. Please help them recover. Let them live. And then they die. And we may react the way Job does in these words. God is looking at me like an enemy. He's inventing things against me and he's punishing me when I haven't done anything. That wasn't what was going on there. In chapter 38, beginning in verse 1, God speaks to Job. Chapter 38, verses 1 through 7. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Job may have been thinking, what does that have to do with my question about why you allowed my kids to die? But this is how the Lord responds to him. Do you know how the earth is established? Do you know how it was created? Do you know how it hangs in balance? Do you understand everything, Job? And Job has to acknowledge, no, there's a lot I don't understand. The world is operating even without my understanding how it operates or why it's able to operate. In chapter 39, verses 26 and 27, the Lord is still speaking to Job. Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars, stretching its wings toward the south? Is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? What is the Lord trying to tell Job here? It is the Lord who commands the eagle to mount up. It's by the Lord's understanding that the hawk soars. The Lord knows. Even if Job doesn't know, the Lord knows. And we can apply that to a whole lot of things, including the issues of life and death. We often don't know why something happened. I doubt that Abraham ever understood in his life why he had to go through that thing of offering his son. But we understand because we're able to look back and we have the scriptures we can tie together. We can understand that, but Abraham probably never did. In the case of Job, God never tells Job why he allowed his sons to be killed. In Job chapter 40, verses 3 and 4, after God challenges Job on, do you understand everything? Do you have to understand everything? Job says in Job 40, verse 4, behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I have spoken, and I will not answer it, even twice, and I will add no more. Job beginning to realize, okay, there's a lot the Lord understands that I don't. And I just have to accept that. The Lord knows why, and I don't. And just trust in the fact that the Lord knows why. In chapter 40, I've just read that passage. But God never tells Job why. Instead, the Lord shows Job that he himself knows, that the Lord knows, and the Lord is in control. And if we trust God, if we believe that God is good, then we're just sometimes going to have to trust that God, in his wisdom, allowed it to happen, and that that's okay. We can look back and see the good that comes from Job's story. You know, all the people through all the years who've looked at Job's story and learned about patience, learned about trusting God. We see the good that came from that story. In the case of my mom, we prayed. We prayed that she would be healed from that cancer. We did not think it made any sense at all for her to die. She was a woman of influence. She was a woman of influence outside our family. And she was a woman of influence within our family. Plus, we just liked having her around. And we didn't understand. It made no sense to us why she should die. Looking back, I can see some good that came from her death that wouldn't have come without her death. Now, selfishly, I would still make the decision to save her if it were up to me. But we can look back, like I said, and see some good things that transpired as people learned about her story and about her life in ways that would never have been shared or told or spread about without her early death. Back to my nephew Adam. That was on a Sunday afternoon that he drowned in the river. That Sunday morning at church, none of us were there, but we were told what happened in church that morning. Of course, there was a large group of college students at the congregation that he went to there in Bowling Green. And there was a college class that Sunday morning. And the topic they were talking about that Sunday morning was, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And we are told that Adam spoke up. And said, I tell my friends, this world is like a broken down house. My God takes care of us and wants to get us out of it. We are not made for this world. And that is so true. We're not made for this world. We're made to be with God in eternity. And sometimes we place too much emphasis on how do things go for us in this world. Do I have to suffer the loss of someone whom I love because they got sick and died, or there was an accident and they died? God does take care of us and loves us. He knows us. In Matthew chapter 10, verses 29 to 31. Matthew chapter 10, beginning in verse 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent? And yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Therefore do not fear, you are of more value than many sparrows. God knows you, and he cares about you. God knew Job. God knew Job, and he cared about Job. Sometimes there are difficult things in this life that we have to endure, for reasons we may not understand at the time. But it's not all about this world, right? It's about trusting God and anticipating that next world. God knew the family of James, whom Herod beheaded. And he cared about this. God knows my brother and sister-in-law who lost their son in that river. God knows my dad and the rest of us. Dad who lost his wife, us who lost our mother, grandmother. God knows you. God knows you. He knows how many hairs are on your head. Fewer for some of us than for others. He knows you and he cares about you. And we may not know why we have to experience some of the losses that we experience. But God is in control. Remember those questions he asked to Job. Do you understand how this works? Do you understand how that works? Are you in control of this? Are you in control of that? No, you're not, Job. But I am. And it's okay. It's okay. I wouldn't put you through it if it weren't okay. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. No trial has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted or tried beyond what you are able. He knows what we can handle. And we need to trust him and handle it by trusting him that he knows why things happen and why he allows things to happen. We can question him. And I said earlier, I don't think there's anything wrong with asking the Lord why. you know? But trusting that even if we never know why in this life, that God does know why it's okay. We can lean on him and trust in his care. The final passage I want to read from this morning is from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 26, the last enemy that will be abolished is death. And then from verse 51 through the end of the chapter, behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead, those that we've lost, and us, if we die before the Lord comes again. And the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable must put on the imperishable, and this mortal must put on immortality. But when this perishable will have put on the imperishable, and this mortal will have put on the immortality, then will come about the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? Where really is your sting? Sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is in the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the words of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. It's not all about this world. We are not made for this world. So some of us will leave it early. It's hard for us. But we have the aim to go and be with the Lord. That's what it's all about. In a moment, we're going to stand and sing our song of invitation. I am resolved. We need to have that resolve to trust in the Lord, to serve the Lord, to put other things aside, to be his children, and work for that day when we are with him in eternity. If you have a need to come this morning, would you do so as we stand and sing?